Astroneer is a calming little game about building bases on different planets. Most of these planets are treacherous, but none are quite as dangerous as Atrox, the final and most difficult planet. Atrox has the most difficult terrain in the entire game, making it difficult to establish much infrastructure there. The sun barely shines and the wind rarely blows, making power equally difficult. The only unique resource the planet offers, helium, is only used in the final step to make the most advanced material in the game. Going to Atrox early on in your Astroneer journey is just asking for a bad time, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Here's how this works. I'm going to start a new game on Silva like usual, and hop into creative mode for a moment. I'm going to research the basic ship components, build a small shuttle, fly it to Atrox, and blow it up. I place a new shelter down to replace the one on Silva, and I'm ready to go. While setting up the run, I also forgot to interact with the landing pad, so I don't have access to the mission log. This means I won't have easy access to QTRTGs, which are really useful for powering small items. Let's call that an extra challenge. This run will be considered complete when we insert the triptych into the core of the planet and awaken it. When finding a landing spot on Atrox, I wanted to prioritize spots that were close to the monoliths that are spread across the surface of the planet. Usually I can find a spot that's close enough that my base can spread onto the monolith, but Atrox decided that wasn't on the menu this time. I ended up in a spot that was fairly close, but it would still be a journey trying to get over there. Luckily, I'm able to see some compound close by. I'll suffocate if I stay too far from my oxygenator for too long, and compound allows me to craft some tethers to extend its range. My path to the first deposit of resin was just as easy as the compound, thankfully. Resin is a crucially important early game resource that's used to build platforms and basic storage, so having this much in an easy-to-access place was very useful. On my last save, I had to run a decent distance away from the base to get any surface resin, and on this save there are two huge deposits between my base and the monolith. The plants that are constantly harassing me also explode into valuable research samples. Research is probably the only thing Atrox will provide me in large quantities, so I take this victory while I can get it, and I unlock all the basic things I need for an early game base. I get my printers set up, make platforms for a smelter, and set up a large platform with all my storage so I can stop putting my resource in a giant pile. While I was scavenging earlier, I got incredibly lucky and found a small battery, a small wind turbine, and a medium wind turbine on one pile of junk scattered over a hill. Whoever those poor Astroneers were, they were probably allowed to go to other planets. Evidently, it didn't help them too much, but it helped me a ton. Power is hard to come by on this planet at the best of times, so having a source of renewable power will help with micromanaging generators. While I'm setting all that up, I can't believe my eyes as I notice one of the elusive marbles laying in a nearby inexplicable pit. It may have no utilitarian purpose, but my lust for treasure knows no bounds, so I slap it together an oxygen filter and I venture forth into the wild beyond. It's nice to see that there's a lot of salvageable wreckage down here. It's a lot of useful material for later on in the run. There's also a working medium generator down here, which is really lucky. Medium generators make a lot of power, and the resource they run on isn't very hard to get. I make a note to pick up that generator later, and notice some laterite in the wall. Digging through this terrain is pretty slow without any drill mods, but I managed to get 4 laterite in me before I decide it's a good idea to head back up. I place my marble somewhere it's not going to roll off into the distance, and I smelt up the laterite into some aluminum. I use some of the aluminum to get a soil centrifuge up and running. Nothing the soil centrifuge offers is technically unobtainable on Atrox, but the clay it provides will make hunting ceramic much less irritating. And that's good, because at this point, I'm sick of not having enough power for things. The easiest way to power things here on Atrox is via wind, because wind always gives the same output regardless of the wind rating of the planet. Solar panels only give about half of their rated power due to Atrox's low sun rating, which means that they aren't going to be as useful or space efficient as the wind. What wind does lose is the consistency of the sun's orbit. Either way, we're going to be severely bottlenecked by our lack of power storage, which needs zinc. Zinc is ordinarily one of the easier elements to get a hold of because it's really common on the starting planet, but we have no such luxury. We have to rely on batteries left behind as salvage. While all my soil centrifuge parts are cooking, I spend a little time patching up the giant holes I've made in the neighborhood. The last thing I need is to fall into a weird pit I made out of a resin deposit. Terraining in this game is pretty fun anyway. It feels kind of like painting. With the proximal pits perfectly plugged to prevent passing, and the centrifuge completely and carefully constructed, I proceed to procure a power platform. Small wind turbines are only one ceramic, which means the centrifuge can create them out of just soil. It comes together pretty quickly, and should power our base for the time being. I also use the bits of research I've been picking up as I get rid of the local plant life to research a drill mod, which will finally allow me to dig through these mountains much faster, and make mining further down the planet a less of an impossibility. I quickly research the leveling block, my personal favorite tool for finding good angles to make tunnels. I use it a couple times to set up an angle for a ramp down into a local pit. This is much better than sliding precariously down the sheer face of a cliff, and it's much friendlier for vehicles. As I set up the little mining hole, I make sure to pick up the medium generator I saw down in the pit earlier on, and collect a few more organic to turn into carbon. Now I have a backup power supply for when I need a little more oomph. After that's home, I decide now is a good time as any to give that drill mod a whirl. I dig down as far as I can, and I'm met with my biggest fear. The red and yellow rock layer just under the crust of the planet is impossible to dig through with drill mod 1, meaning we can't access any of the caves on this planet until we get an upgrade. Right around here is when we start running into the real challenge of this run. We can't make a chemistry lab or atmospheric condenser without access to iron or tungsten, which aren't available on Atrox. Ordinarily, I'd get these things on Atrox by making a trade platform and using all the salvage I'm finding around the neighborhood, but that also needs materials we can't get yet. It's a catch-22. I can't get iron or tungsten without already having access to iron or tungsten. So where can we find one? Well, salvage has a very small chance to contain resources. We might be able to find one randomly. So I pack my whole backpack with oxygen filters and set out on an expedition to find one of the resources we need to progress. As I explore, I make sure to pop as many plants as possible. Researching large items takes a lot of power, so I want to keep sustaining myself via small research items for as long as I can. Given how many bits of salvage were near my house, I expected the search for salvage otherwise to be pretty simple. But you can't take anything for granted on Atrox. The mountains on this planet are so tall, I'm not sure if I'm able to render the salvage in the pits properly, and the pits themselves offer no vantage points from which to see the next salvage. The journey ends up taking a while, exhausting my entire backpack of its oxygen supply and then some. The worst thing is, we don't even find what we're looking for. There was no iron or tungsten to speak of on the journey. What we do find, however, is an insanely rare spawn of a QTRTG. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know they could spawn as salvage. I thought they were only from rare research aids. Needless to say, this is an incredible find, so I decided to call off the expedition here to stay safe. The QTRTG will allow us to power not just our backpack's built-in printer, but also every tier of drill mod and an additional terrain gun mod if we wanted, meaning we don't have to worry about all the backpack power for the rest of the playthrough. Before I head home, I decide to test a hunch of mine. Some of these tunnels at the bottom of these pits are awfully long. I bet I could find one that heads down into the caves and bypass the needs for a new drill. Lucky for me, the tunnel I decided to test my hunch on was one of those tunnels, and not even the severe pain from the nearby dagger roots piercing assault could ruin my mood. Not only did we have a QTRTG, we had a plan for how we could get underground. There's a ton more salvage in the cave system, and I have a hunch it's going to be a lot more valuable than some funny horns and medium generators. It was harder than I was expecting, but I eventually managed to find a tunnel that led safely down into the cave system. Unfortunately, this is far from the lucky break I needed. I can't dig any of the terrain down here, so I'm completely at the mercy of cave generation, and to make matters worse, I'm not even sure if the materials I need can even spawn down here. On top of that, I can't get rid of any of the nasty plants that spawn here either. After over 20 minutes of searching for the tunnel, building infrastructure, and making sure I didn't run out of oxygen, all I had to show for it was another medium generator. This was going to take a while. At this point in the run, I spend a couple hours looking underground for salvage, and then my power cuts out and I lose all the footage. So... Listen, the rest of the run is legit, just give this to me. From here on, I'll need to get all the non-standard materials I need from the trade platform, which means I finally get to cash in all that salvage I've been hunting. Now that I have access to lithium and zinc, I can get to building medium batteries and solve some power problems, as well as finally having access to larger platforms because of all the iron. After spending most of the recording session gathering debris to shove into a shredder, I had more scrap than a professional Team Fortress player. I make a drill mod 2, which is what all this malarkey was about in the first place, and I tested on my big old mining hole and made 3 recording sessions ago. It's far from the pace I'd like to be mining at, but beggars can't be choosers. Getting the hydrogen to make diamonds is a whole other can of worms at this point. While I'm casually exploring for salvage and poking around in the caves, I come across a lucky stick of dynamite and blow up my very first exocache. Not only does this net me some precious scrap, but also a whopping 3 exochips, the first time I'd ever seen a cache drop more than 1. I don't know exactly what I want to use them for, but I'm glad to have some of the annoying materials laying around for once. At the end of this session, I set up an extra-large platform B, my personal favorite for storing large amounts of items that take medium sockets, and begin setting up a battery array for the next step of our plans. We're going to need a lot of power for this atmospheric condenser. Lithium is really expensive on the scrap market, so I spend a lot of time searching around for salvage near my base and blowing up more caches. After an hour or so, I have more exochips than I know how to spend, and a brand new battery array, complete with 8 batteries and 2 solar panels. It can get a little sketchy right before the sun comes up, but this battery array is more than enough to power my base most of the time. Now that our power concerns are finally met, it's time to get started on the endgame. In order to complete the challenge, there are only 2 goals left: power the monolith and make it to the core. I used some of the exochips I've gathered to build a large rover. While the rover was building, I decided it's probably easier to just make a bridge to the monolith. I've spent too long messing around with the devil that is Unreal Engine car physics, and I'm not about to lose this many resources to some random hole in the ground. Luckily, our current power system was enough to get the monolith up and running, but I was surprised just how much power they needed. Regardless, that was the easy part done. Getting to the core was going to be the real journey. Digging a hole all the way to the center of Atrox with only a drill mod 2 and a boost mod is an absolute nightmare. I dig at half the speed I'm used to, keep having to adjust the angle to keep my tunnel actually heading downwards instead of perpendicular, and keep having to head back up to find some compound to make tethers with. Thankfully, the sights of the underground biomes keep me entertained in the fleeting moments before digging yet further downward. After what felt like an hour, I finally reached the core, and fell out of the tunnel trying to get a good shot. After some finagling, I get some infrastructure in place to easily get out of the core again, and embark on my final task. See, every planet wants a specific resource to activate its core. On Silva, you need zinc, on Vasania, you need graphene, etc. The problem is, because Atrox is so harsh, it naturally needs the only kind of resource I legitimately cannot get on this planet: hydrogen. One of the two kinds of gases that isn't present on Atrox, and gas isn't available on the scrap market. But I'm not going to use creative mode, I'm going to do it legit. So I build a new space shuttle, pack up the atmospheric condenser, do a little old school astroneering. It's weird being on Silva again after all my time on Atrox. Everything's so flat. Ironically, I had some power issues, but you don't need that much to get a full can of hydrogen. All that was left was to take it down to the core. It feels kinda anticlimactic. I started this run back in June. I have 60 gigs of footage. I wrote this whole script as I went, and I was about to just walk to the core and take my prize. Felt kinda wrong? Maybe the answer is to finish the save. Do the other planets in the same way. Can't be much harder than this, right? I actually haven't lived on most of the planets on my own in my time playing, because I always play multiplayer. If you'd like to see me try to tackle another planet, let me know which one you'd like to see in the comments. This video was really fun to make, and Astroneer is a great game, so I'd be happy to revisit it sometime. I'd initially planned to have something really exciting in the middle of this video, but I got really frustrated during production and I ended up cutting it. Either way, thanks for sticking it out with me through this whole video, and I'll see you around sometime.